what is JSONP? Now, you've probably heard of JSONP before. You may have even used it, but do you really understand what it is and how it works? And I suppose more importantly, do you really understand when you're supposed to use it? It's a solution to the problem which was brought up in the previous lecture, which was all about the same origin policy of a browser. And I introduced you to CORS, which is the current method, the current accepted method of being able to bend the rules of the same origin policy. JSONP is something that predates CORS, predates the CORS standard, and was created as a kind of pseudo standard way to retrieve data from a different domain. So it basically solves the same problem that CORS solves, but it does have a couple of limitations. The main one is that it only works with GET requests. It doesn't work with PUT, POST, or DELETE requests. But even with that limitation, it does have a lot of uses. For example, you can use JSONP to query the Yahoo weather service, and it will work just fine on any browser with no extra configuration. So if you just want to do like a GET request and the API that you're getting from supports JSONP, then JSONP is usually a much simpler solution to bending that same origin policy and requesting that data from a different domain. So what's actually going on? Let's have a look at just a basic JSON file. So I've just created one here. So if you're requesting data from a server which returns JSON, this is the kind of data which you might receive. Remember, we're just talking about JSON here. This is an array with one element. Let me just make it a little bit easy to understand. This JSON response is an array with one element with the ID, first name, and last name. But in a JSONP response, what you would get is not just returning the JSON, it would wrap it with the name of a function. And in this example, I'm just going to call it asim function. Now, to understand that better, let me actually just take this file name, and let me delete this other one. And I'm just going to rename it now. Instead of JSON, I'm going to rename it to JSONP.js. Okay. I'll close that. So now you can see actually what I've written here isn't a JSON response. It's actually a valid piece of JavaScript. So I'm doing something. I'm calling a function called asim's function, and I'm passing it an array. So this is what we would receive from a server when we're asking it to return as JSONP. It would wrap the JSON in a function call, the name of a function. We would provide it that function, and it would basically return us something that looks just like JavaScript. So how does wrapping some JSON in a function magically make it allowed to be accessed from another domain? Now, the answer to that is a neat little trick. A regular script tag does not have any limitations as to which domain it can pull down a script from. So it doesn't need to adhere to the same origin policy which you would need to adhere to if you were making an AJAX request. You can actually include a script in your HTML file from any domain in the world, and the browser will allow it. So in our script tag here, I've actually added the name of the JSONP. Now, in this example, it's on the same domain, but I just want to show you how JSONP works. So if a script tag is added to a page, the browser then loads the file associated in the source property and then executes the code inside it straight away. Now, if we have a function available in our index.html file, so let's say this function is called callback function, so we can then tell the server when we're making the request to use the function name callback function, so that when it returns us this snippet of JSONP, the browser will then look for a function with the same name and execute that instead. So that's what's happening here. Let me show you in a browser. I've loaded up that snippet in a browser. Let me look at the console. And you can see here, so let me refresh the page. So as expected, so you can see it loaded the JSONP response called the callback function, and we're just logging it here, which you can see in the console log. So that's what happens under the hood when you make a JSONP request to a server. You tell the server via usually a query parameter on the request. You tell it the name of the function it should wrap its JSON response with. It then returns the JSON response, and it essentially looks like a piece of JavaScript. You add a script tag onto the page, and you put the full URL to the API that you're requesting as the source parameter. When the browser detects this script tag, it then executes it. And then hopefully, if you've done it right, you would have created a callback function somewhere in your code. It needs to have been defined before the script tag got executed, but that would need to be available to the browser. And when this API returns, the browser then looks for a function matching what's in the response, and then you process the result. Now, you typically wouldn't be doing JSONP like this. You'd be using a library like jQuery. You'd be passing a parameter of JSONP. But really, that's what's happening under the hood. That's what jQuery is doing for you in that scenario. Now, an important distinction, so something I think that's quite useful, or quite important really, is if you look at the network tab, and if you were to be looking at the XHR, so that's typically where we would see our AJAX requests and responses, we wouldn't find it here. We wouldn't find our AJAX request and response here. That's because we're treating it as if it was a script, or it might come through as a document. You might see it in the All tab. And that's just something to remember when you're dealing with JSONPs. You won't see it in the XHR tab. You will see it in the All tab, because you're not sending an AJAX request. You're using a trick of the browser, and you're pretending you're loading a JavaScript file, not making an API request to another server for some data. Okay, let's actually go through a specific example with JavaScript. So I've created one in a file called weather. Okay, so let's go through a specific example of how we can use JSONP with an API that supports JSONP. So the API we're going to use is the Yahoo APIs for weather. Now, you don't need any accounts with Yahoo to make this kind of request. I've got the URL here that we're going to request, and you can see it's got some data in there, but the important stuff is at the end. So I'm requesting a format of JSONP. So I'm telling this API that the response I want to receive is a JSONP response, and I'm telling it that the function I want it to wrap that JSONP with is going to be called process weather. So let me show you. You can actually just open this up in a browser. Let me open up in the browser we have here. So let me open up here. I'm just going to, and there you go. It's returning, well, the format is a file, isn't it? It's not going to be returning JSON. It's returning a file because it thinks it's going to be giving us some code to execute. So let me open that up and let me show you. So you can see it's returned a file. Hope you can see that. Let me zoom in. So it's returned some JSON, so you can see the JSON it's returned is here, but it's wrapped it in a function called process weather, which is what we wanted it to do. Just to show you the difference, if I had put the path in here, but I just said instead of JSONP, perhaps I'd requested, and I'm not sure if it takes JSON actually, but let's have a look. Okay, yeah. So with this API, I've just told it, look, I just want to receive JSON with that request, and it's just returned as JSON. And I presume, I don't know, let me check. What if does it support XML? Oh yeah, there you go. So this API supports XML as well, so it would return as the same data as XML. But we've requested, in our code, we've requested the format as JSONP. So let's have a look at the rest of this code then as well. So what's going to happen then is when I'm going to call request JSONP, going to pass it the URL, and then you can see here, I create a script tag. I set the source of that script tag to the URL. I find the head of the page, and then I insert the script tag at the head of the page so that it will load up that API and execute it as if it was JavaScript. But as well as that, we also need the function that it's going to call. So here is the process weather function, which will be called when the browser executes this script tag. So there you go. Let's try this out in a browser. You bring it up here. So it's this browser here. And you're not going to see anything on the screen just yet. But let me refresh that page. So you can see in the network tab. Again, you won't see it in the XHR section. You'll only see it in the all section or the script section. And this is the request, the API request that we made. And you can see the response is that JSON wrapped with the process weather function. And then you can see in the console on line 19, it's calling the process weather function and we're just logging it out to the console. There we go. So that's JSONP. That's how it works under the hood, whether you're using jQuery or AngularJS. When you request data to come via JSONP, so what it does is it creates a random function name, makes sure that's available to the browser, creates a fake script tag, adds your API request as the source, adds that to the page, lets the browser download that API response and execute it as if it was JavaScript. It will then call whatever function that the framework you're using created, and the framework will then return that to you as if you'd made a AJAX request. And it's a solution to the same origin policy in a browser, and it's just another solution as opposed to the CORS solution I showed you previously. It predates the CORS method, but still used today because, as you can see, it's so easy to use. If you're only interested in doing a GET request and the server supports JSONP, then why the hell not?